Ready to go? Okay. So by a show of hands, who here is involved in like a central services team doing an agile transformation or a DevOps transformation, digital transformation? Yeah, okay. I'm one of you guys. How big typically do you guys like? Is it for like smaller startups or anybody here from like a larger company, maybe supporting, dozens of teams? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm definitely one of you guys. So my name is Charles Connelly. I'm director at CA Technologies. We're a pretty big software company. We've got about 3,000 engineers, like 12,000 employees. I've been in the common services team for a while now, particularly in the tools focus. I've been a manager of the team, so like kind of own the operations of it, development teams, integration. And currently, I'm more of an enablement focus. And what I do is basically work with some of our higher revenue products or the growth products and do basically DevOps consulting with them, try to get them to make their process more efficient, get better uses and adoption of our tools. So enough about me. We're here to talk about taxonomy. I know it's a really exciting topic, right? So anybody who's not familiar, is everyone familiar with taxonomy? For the most part? Okay, so taxonomy is just basically a science of classification. And so classification is really like the action and process of carrying something according to shared qualities or characteristics. So what you're trying to do is associate things together kind of with a common name to make relationships. It's pretty similar to like a data model or an ER diagram or something like that, just to get that established, at least in this context. Another classic definition of taxonomy is one about doing the same thing but for organisms, but we're not talking about frogs here, even though we're at a frog conference. So the underlying premise that got me thinking about taxonomy and why it's important is that managing a deployment pipeline is really a battle against complexity. It's continuous battle, and there are a few reasons for that. Traditionally, when teams would set up let's say, deployment pipeline, they might just put these sort of simpler tools in there to start. So you get like an agile planning tool or Kanban board to do planning, source code, obviously. Source control is important for coding, IDEs and things of that nature too. Build, got your CI server, you build framework, you might want to run some unit tests. You got your code quality scan, which a lot of people hook up like a Sonar Cube type of thing. Automated testing is important. People would hook that up. Want to have some test runners. If you've got your discipline, you'd have test management, which is where you redefine your tests and write them down, so you can trace them, see if the run rates and things of that nature. And then putting it into production, you release. So you'd have some sort of release automation product. But as these pipelines mature, a lot of more tools start creeping in to the pipeline. I've seen these all at CA. So you've got requirements designing tools like test case modeling, things of that nature. Obviously, defect management. That's probably should have been in the first part, but once you've shipped your product, defects start rolling in. You have to manage those. And on the code side, you got code reviews becoming increasingly important. So people like to put in tools to automate the code review process, kind of make the robot code review where possible. Related to that are linting tools, which get plugged into the IDE, give you instantaneous feedback as you're coding. And you got your code generation utilities, things for enabling mobile, API development, things of that nature. So that stuff starts creeping in. In your build, you've got, you want to see how good your unit tests are, or at least how much coverage you have on your unit tests. So you get code coverage tool hooked up. Obviously, artifact repository. I think everybody's familiar with that concept here at this show. Other kind of scan, and this is something I don't know if I'm innovating on this or not, but I haven't seen a lot of deployment pipeline diagrams that call out scanning as a separate step. But I think it's becoming more and more relevant to call it a separate step, and it's because there's so many different types of code scanners that you can hook up, and they all seem to offer a certain extra level of value as you add more in there. So you've got security scans, on top of your quality scans, IP scans. This find out if you've got third-party libraries in there that you're not supposed to. Localization, if you sell your product to people that are different, that speak different languages, you need to scan for compliance to those type of things. So, and then just like automated translation kind of happens during that process as well. So, tests. I mean, I know there's some former Mercury people walking around here, but there are so many test tools nowadays that you can hook up, covering many different areas. Some we touch upon here is performance testing, obviously, penetration testing, and then as you set up all those environments, you got to manage all that stuff. So you got your lab management and your environment configuration, your sheps, puppets, those type of thing. Even on the deploy side, there might be legal compliances that you have to deal with, like escrow, which is this idea that if your customer's buying your software and you go out of business, they still want to have your software, so you have to put it in kind of a third-party place where they're legally obligated to maintain that. So, and obviously, again, with a release artifact repository, it would be something like BinTray. You use to be a definitive software library for that. And then there's those people that want to approve the deployment before it just goes out the door. So, and then operate, and monitor and those type of things is in addition to that. So you can kind of get where I'm getting at from the complexity standpoint in terms of just the sheer variety. Now, each of those tools comes with this like management overhead that you have to consider. So you've got your identity access management and single sign-on, and that's important for particularly larger organizations where the users don't want to spend a lot of time logging in, and you've got to, you're managing multiple teams, and you want to have the ability to make sure that they're accessing the right projects and things like that consistently across the tools. People have access to source code in one project, shouldn't have access to it in another, that type of thing, or should actually. You've got just the overall organization and setup and configuration type of aspects. We've got considerations for cloud and on-premise. Personally, I think that's it's like something that you kind of almost want a solution that you can switch between the two depending on legal requirements. Like at CA, we sell a lot of banks, so they don't really want us to put our source out in the cloud, because they're running critical systems and things, so they don't want injection like that. Performance optimization. So if you had a distributed team, there's latency involved with artifacts. That's why Artifactory has that notion of having replicated servers to speed things up. You want to get data out of the tools so you can make data-driven decisions. Migrate. If you're swapping out tools, data migration is important from the old tool, as well as consistency of data between tools. You've got just your regular monitoring, all your ops stuff, backup, disaster recovery, high availability concerns. If you're running a shared service, you might need to have a service desk or self-service portal. And then the documentation of the tools is never sufficient. There's always some additional documentation that's needed to tell the users how we're using it in context of how it's deployed. So that adds to the complexity. And then you got integration, right? And it's you've got all these tools, but you want them to work together. So this is a picture of our sort of ideal deployment pipeline in CA, where we use our tools mixed with best of breed. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I know this is the kind of slide that people like taking pictures of, so I'll let you guys take your pictures while we move on. But effectively, what we have here is the different swim lanes that I was talking about in this deployment pipeline. And you can see how we use Artifactory as kind of the glue between these phases to kind of abstract one phase from another, right on through to the production in certain cases. So, yeah, things are complex, and if you're inefficient about things, it can get kind of expensive. So what we're showing here is that there's it's talking about the number of teams that sort of adopt this pipeline, and then the actual cost of adoption as the y-axis. And so this first line is meant to show kind of a less efficient setup where your initial cost of adoption down below it was fairly high, and then each additional team when they're setting them up, you're getting a high cost of adoption there as well. So what you want to do is optimize that, right? You want to have you want to set the tool up faster. You want to get lower incremental costs and faster setup times. And the benefit of that, obviously, is savings. It's not just savings in terms of money, it's savings in terms of time, lead time, very critical thing to consider when you're talking about deployment pipelines. So getting back into taxonomy, I believe that some of those savings can be achieved through taxonomy or having a standard taxonomy. And so these are the premises. I'll go through these things in a little more detail as we show examples, and then we'll conclude, and it'll probably be the same content again, actually. But basically, you want to lower your costs using convention over configuration. And what does that mean? That basically means that you want to kind of set things up in a more consistent way following patterns and assumptions that things are structured in a certain way. Like Maven, it was really kind of the first thing that was really popular from a build framework that really leveraged convention over configuration. The reason it's still sticking around right now is because it's so gosh darn easy to integrate with other tools. You hook up Artifactory and you're up and running with Maven in minutes. Ant and Ivy is great, but there's a lot of initial setup time that you have to figure out when you want to figure out your convention. So that simplifies things. And that's really from an incremental perspective. Up front, a taxonomy can really help you benefit things by having clear understanding of what your requirements are from an integration perspective. So, because if you understand how things fit together, then it's got a lot easier to set things up quickly. And I also recommend just doing the least possible amount of integration. Don't overdo it. Because that'll add to your original setup time, the lead time. Very similar to this is just avoiding wasted effort, and that's what I was kind of getting at with that last point, where just don't do unnecessary things, right? You want to be efficient, and you want to do things right the first time if possible, if you plan it out. So the taxonomy can help you there by helping you understand in advance how everything's going to fit together the right way. You understand your tools. You get a new tool, you go in, you investigate it, you understand how it works, how it's meant to be used, and consistent with your taxonomy. That can save you time by less rework, basically. And then there's this, just swapping out tools. If it was set up one way and you had a specific data model set up on one tool, the next tool, if they're similar enough, you could swap them out in an easier form, an easier way, and that kind of goes back to that convention over configuration as well. And then obviously, if you have lots of tools, you want to have visualization into those tools and see what's going on, not just in one tool, but across the tools. And having understanding of your taxonomy helps you set up better reporting so you can get that visibility. And we'll get into a little bit more of that later. So back to these dots here that I mentioned at the beginning. It's really a lesson in efficiency. If you can do things with less possible moves, the better, right? It's kind of getting into that reduce waste concept. So I'm going to just go through. I'm going to solve this puzzle as we go along. So if you guys don't know the answer to it, you will by the end of the presentation. So step one, kind of foundational. And the analogy really here is how to set up your taxonomy, right? To get going with this methodology. So step one, establish a pipeline, workflow, and entry criteria. And so what does that mean? Well, we've been showing that chevron a number of times during this presentation, but that's really a workflow. It's a simplified version of it, but it's effectively telling you what order things are going to be executing in. You can have a sequence diagram or something more detailed, or just a regular flow chart to model it out. But it's really a good idea to understand where you're going in advance and how things are going to fit together. It helps you build out your requirements for your pipeline if you're starting from scratch, or if you have an existing one, it helps you rationalize how it's all set together. Now, the scorecard, I think many people probably do this, but other times tools come in through more organic approaches. CA, we acquire companies. We've been acquiring a lot of companies lately in the space. And whenever they do that, they go to me and they say, now we got to get everybody on that tool. So, there's different things. Now what I'm happy about is lately the companies we've acquired have been very good. And so the people in the tech due diligence are doing this type of assessment. But if I were going to go pick another tool, a best of breed off the shelf to incorporate in my pipeline, these are the type of things that I'd like to take a look at: the value, support availability, management requirements, integratability. And if you think about value, you're thinking about your feature function, your usability. Obviously, cost is important. None of the vendors here will say, that cost is important, but cost is important, obviously, from a consumption standpoint. One of the things here too is that if you set up like a Pew matrix like this, establishing a weight and a ranking system is key. So like when you go through each tool, you can kind of give it a +2, -2, with 0 being kind of the baseline. And that's like a nice rational approach, so you can compare it across multiple tools. And in this structure, really, there is actually a taxonomy to this document, if you think about it, because it's categorizing things and it's associating it, and then you can use the same template across many tools and get kind of a general visibility into what's going on in terms of your matrix. So, some things that I'd recommend around support is obviously you want to pick something with pretty high adoption rate, strong community around it. More and more everybody's going into the products that started either open source or kind of a try and buy type of model that has like a strong community. We value that over like paid support, but the paid support's important as you scale it out too, right? In the management area, more and more, we're really looking at ease of configuration. If the product is difficult to set up, it's going to be high. It's going to give you that higher curve we were talking about in terms of learning and getting it going. So you want to get going quickly. I personally view logging as an extremely important thing because you want to get the data out of the tool. The more you can get data out of the tools, the more information you can get out of it, and you can make better decisions. So tools are not just for doing work. It's also about getting information. Excuse me. You can cut that from the video, right? All right. So where were we at? So yeah, so integration, that's really key. Now a lot of products these days, we're really looking for REST and webhooks. I mean, it's pretty obvious that that's where it's like a necessary functionality for most applications. But the ability for it to be proactive, event-based, and pushing things into your system, that's really it's really easy to wire things up, and then you can use any number of different integration technologies to to assemble your integration, and you're not sort of limited there, and you can avoid maybe some expensive solutions that have to compensate for the lack of these type of APIs. So step 2 in our process here, no one said you could go outside the lines, right? That's the key to the puzzle, by the way. If you have to think outside the box a bit, right? So, deriving your taxonomy, looking at the tools that you selected, and then trying to figure out what the taxonomy is. So again, this kind of, anybody that's familiar with an entity, an ER diagram, or it's very similar concept to what I'm talking about. It's essentially a data model. But it's a data. The reason it's a taxonomy is because we're talking lots of different tools that need to apply to the same data model for correlation, right? So in here, we start with plan, and in plan, you go look at your agile planning tool, your defect management tool, anything that you're going to be using to plan things out, and you want to track, right? Later, maybe in reports and things of that nature. So you could create a skeleton. Here, we're talking about BU. Again, large company, we've got several business units, so that's in there. But if you didn't find that important, then don't put it in there, right? Simplify it. This is an example. It's not designed to be something that you all have to follow. I'm not saying this is the one DevOps taxonomy, right? I'm saying this is one that is an example here. So another thing in here that I might want to clarify is like a PI. If you're not doing Scaled Agile framework, a PI probably doesn't mean anything, but in Scaled Agile framework, PI is basically like a fixed set of time that people do, to basically measure their release planning. So yeah, we've built out a basic taxonomy here. Now we're going to go into the middle phases, and as you see, it's not that much stuff gets added in here. You start actually getting into the actual process of building the software, and you see the artifact appeared, and there's some more tools getting added to the mix. We already accounted for teams and people, so if you're thinking about permissions and stuff like that, it all sort of falls into the same area. And then when we get into test, now it gets a little bit more complete. You get your test results. But as you see, it's sort of leveraging stuff that was already defined in plan. And then once you finally get to deploy, which I guess I'd already got there, and now you're talking about, I'll give you a comparison there because I skipped ahead. But basically you've got it now so that you've got a full production system. Now you have a certain degree of confidence that this is fairly comprehensive. So then we'll move on to the next phase, right? Oh yeah, by the way, yeah. Once you've sort of established a taxonomy, that scorecard that we were talking about earlier, it's a good idea to add taxonomy fit into that scorecard, because then you'll select a tool that'll be easier for you to integrate in, because it kind of applies to that data model that you already put together. So again, outside the lines, for the puzzle, we're getting, I think at this point you probably already know the answer, or how to get the next two lines. So why don't you adopt that taxonomy we were just talking about? That's really step 3. Now, the thing is that I'm going to start with what to not do when adopting a taxonomy. So this is an example we ran into at CA. It was we had a scanning tool, and the people that were setting it up were trying to scan really large projects, with multiple modules in it, and millions of lines of code, and the scan was blowing up. And so they say, well, we got to break up the scan into multiple scans, which, good idea. I recommend doing that. Modularity is always good, right? But they said, I don't have anywhere to put those modules in the scanning tool, so I'm just going to cram the module name into the version. And it worked, but then you go in and you say, man, that tool was designed to actually let you compare scans between versions. And now that you've done that, we've lost that piece of functionality from the tool, right? So that's one of the lessons here that I think this was actually the very example that inspired me for this lecture, was that, man, you really got to think this stuff through before you just cram stuff in. And I also realized that the Maven repository layout, like the one that's set up and modeled in Artifactory, solves this, because you just append the module name into the product name, and now you're able to have kind of a unique identifier for this thing, and it's something that would apply to other tools. So if you were doing cross-tool reporting, things would start making a lot more sense. Similarly with now you can do the comparison against the version. So this is the type of analysis you need to do each tool. And it's a lot of work, but you need to really understand what the tools do. If you're in an operations role, sometimes you just want to set it up and hand it off to the users. But I think from an architecture standpoint, or from a sort of intelligent design type of standpoint, that you want to really know in advance what you're trying to accomplish. If you run into issues where there's more metadata that you want to associate with something when you're adopting a tool, because maybe you want to do an integration or something along those lines, you can put the metadata for that into a registry, and have that be maybe the source that you could use for ease of integration and setup and things of that nature. So Artifactory actually could be used for this. At CA, we've actually built a lightweight REST API registry that we did, but Artifactory has functionality right out of the box for that too. And so you can put that metadata on your artifacts and maybe use some of that as for making intelligent integrations downstream. Okay, so adopting your taxonomy. This is actually how you'd wire it up. And so I wanted to give an example with this product that used to be called Rally, now it's CA Agile Central that we acquired. I had to roll out, or I led a team. It was a team effort, right? It wasn't just me. But we had to move like 3,000 engineers off of our former Agile planning tool onto this because we acquired this company. So it was a relatively large-scale exercise, and we only had 6 months to do it because the contract was renewing in 6 months. So when we were planning this project up front, we realized that okay, we got to really make sure that this the data is mapped in correctly, and we can get like a consistent process across the organization, and that it aligns with the SAFe methodology that the Scaled Agile framework methodology that we were rolling out. So this just shows some of the hiccups that we had to face when we were setting up. Like users mapped to people, that's pretty straightforward. But project, what is that? Like, that could be a release. That could be a scheduling thing. What's a project? But it turns out, as we looked at the functionality, a project is really a team in Rally. So we, that was something, and we have to explain that. We had to put that in the documentation, explain that to the users, right? Defect, nice straightforward mapping. Hierarchical requirement, what is that, right? You do some investigation, you realize that in the API is really the user story. So you map it that way. Okay, now you got your release, but if you're doing SAFe, your release in Rally is really a PI, the program increment I was talking about earlier. Iterations or iterations. Milestone is actually the release in Agile Central. And then you got your test cases and your test results. So these type of things, if you mess any of this stuff up when you were doing your data load and not understanding how it was supposed to fit in correlation with other tools, you could have a lot of rework down the road trying to fix all this once you've got it all set up and everybody moved into the tool. Another example, I think everyone's familiar with this, is just the repository layout from Artifactory. So I'll go through this quickly, but you have like a project hierarchy basically that maps into the one in the taxonomy. Your releases are there in the repository layout. There's some things that can uniquely identify the build, and the things that are unique to the artifact. So these things map here like that, and you can't do a presentation nowadays without mentioning Docker. So JFrog's got a nice implementation there. But again, it's like mapping these terms and figuring them out can get a little tricky, because in JFrog, they're leveraging the classic Artifactory, so you have a repository you set up. But in Docker term, that's really a registry, which is the endpoint being accessed. But in terms of this taxonomy, what we're really talking about is kind of access control and what is release versus not release. You got your repository itself, but that's really the project hierarchy telling you what up to the point where it's okay. That's the module, right? And then the tag is really the thing, the build, right? So that's one of these mappings you got to figure out when you add another one of those bullets that I showed earlier into the process. And obviously you got your payload, which is your Docker file. So now we're getting really close. You've got back down to square one there, and I think you know what the answer is going to be. So the real message here is be lean. Like why don't you reduce the waste? So how do you reduce the waste? How can you be lean when you're setting this all up? Well, for one, talk about the convention over configuration earlier. There's this concept that's going around, opinionated pipelines. I've heard a few different names about it, but it's basically this idea that for the most part, all the pipelines are similar. So try to have a pattern, and so when each team goes to pick it up, lead with that pattern, and then if they need to adjust, then adjust off of the initial pattern that you've set up, and that really helps setting up incremental projects. This is a cool feature that the CI servers has kind of snuck in, which is this auto discovery source control. And I was talking to the Circle CI guys do a lot of this too. You just point them at a repository and it builds it. And I was like, how does it know to build it? And it just knows all these patterns. So it's like, again, if you're using Maven, you know how to build Maven. It just automatically knows because of the convention. So you don't have to spend your time setting up the build configuration for most. It's like the 80-20 rule, right? If it's a simple build, it will just know how to do it. And so that saves its setup time. Build pools, shared build machines. This, again, basic functionality of CI servers, but if you're managing this as a service, it's really nice to have like a, kind of a standard Docker image for your build machine, and then leveraging a build pool that you just give people access to it. So you don't go from team to team to team, and everybody like, step one, you go set up your build machine, and then come back to me in 2 days when you've got your build machine set up and we'll hook up the next thing, right? You just give them one. Say, here's a build machine, this probably will work for you. If it doesn't, we'll adjust the Docker image to make it work, right? Reproducible build machines that are configured as code. I kind of was getting at that already, right? But if you put everything through your source control system, it gives more control, more traceability, and now you know how things are configured, and you can scale it out, to more machines. A scanning service, and I called out scan as a separate step. Now, a scanning service, given that basically once you've instrumented the artifact that you want to scan, and you have your source code that's getting scanned along with it, you could package that all up and then hand it off to some sort of single process that it's the same steps that every single person is going to have. So if you wanted to have like 3 or 4 different code scanners going all at once, you could just send it off to a scanning service and avoid having to do all that configuration for every single team. Consolidating integration test cycles. If you have a suite of products and they do integration testing, it's like encourage the guys to just do one set of testing in one pipeline rather than do that repeatedly for each component. So this is all just efficiency stuff. And then the deployment service, similar to the scanning service, the deployment service would be, we're all going into one, for SaaS in particular, right? We're going to go into one sort of hosted environment for the most part. So all those steps are the same, and then you just pass the binaries off to that. But while you're doing all this, don't forget, we said be lean. So you got to remember that, this is all about reducing lead time and getting, and reducing the cycle time for the engineers to get feedback. So don't slow your pipeline down because you've set this up. It's got to be done in an optimized way. And parallelization, techniques like that can really help. So step 5, we've solved the puzzle now. And now it's all about measurement. So you got your unstructured log data, which is important, and then you got your structured tool data. And that's stuff from the database. And then you got your taxonomy. Now you want to apply the taxonomy, if possible, so that you can then get dashboards, analytics, and different types of reports out of it. And this helps you make data-driven decisions. And there's so many different use cases here I could go through. I'm running a little short on time, so I won't go through all of them. But they're, you can imagine trying to debug a problem in production, and you want to know what the source of that is, and you have to look, if you don't have an integrated reporting system that ties this all together, you'd have to go look in several different locations to see if there's a correlation. If you set up good reports that apply the taxonomy, pull them together into one source, you can really identify those issues. And analytics can be proactive and help you discover, some of these issues that are taking place. Analytics from this perspective is really not about what's going on in production, but analytics is going on, for your users if you were managing a shared environment. So you could see if somebody's having a problem with their deployment pipeline, and you could go in and discover that and fix it in advance. So I will try to wrap this up and then open up for questions. This is basically some of the same stuff I led with at the beginning. Planning your pipeline out in advance will lower your long-term costs. It's pretty common sense, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Having an entry criteria to help you pick the right tools. And if you map your process out, you can understand in advance what gaps you need to have filled. Using a taxonomy to understand how your tools fit together lets you leverage convention over configuration to lower your setup time, costs, and lead time. You can have, it helps you get an implied roadmap for your integrations, and it helps you focus on proper utilization of tools in conjunction with one another. The improved correlation in data between the tools helps you with the reporting, and ideally having a taxonomy will help you minimize your swap out costs. And when I say swap out costs, I mean I have to get rid of this tool and get the other one. Like when my company buys another company, and they tell us that we have to move to the new tool. So you got your data, make better decisions with that data. It's key. There are so many times where you can put together, it's like leading a horse to water. Here's all this great data, but nobody uses it. Use the data. It's there for you to make really good decisions. It'll save you time down the road. So with that, I got a little time for questions. If you want to ask questions about this presentation or just how we manage things at a scale at CA, love to answer some of those questions.
How do you handle like the relationship between the groups themselves? How do you manage the relationship between the groups of like the business units in this kind of taxonomy? Because like some groups are going to require things from other groups, and at least where I work, the names of those groups change constantly. So like,
oh, like you just that project hierarchy?
Yeah, and so like one team might depend on another team, and that if you've followed your taxonomy the way that you laid it out, you've named everything in like Artifactory or Jenkins or whatever by the name of that group. And then when their name changes, like how do you react to that? That's just not
that registry that I was talking about earlier can be helpful there, because you might be able to give it more of a unique ID to, if you build out a registry, you could give some sort of unique identifier to your project hierarchy, and just so that if the name changes, then you could still reference that unique ID. So you could use a technique like that.
Okay.
This taxonomy is general for like whole organization, or you have like several taxonomies that are different per each business unit or per each problem that you are solving?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about how you want to correlate the data. I mean, in our case, we've got, you saw in our model we had BU, right? So that there is sort of an implied implication there that maybe the CEO is going to want to pull data out of your tools, right? And he might want to know how many commits per month per organization and how they compare against others, for example, or something along those lines. So, or build times, build frequency. More and more, these DevOps metrics are helping even the executives make decisions. So, if you were setting up a taxonomy like this, you'd want to consider like what level are they making the decisions. And that can help, drive at where your focus is when you're setting it up. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay.
CA is maybe unique's not the right word, but unusual probably for a lot of the folks here in that much of your growth is through acquisition.
Yes.
Right. And so with the taxonomy you've developed here, and obviously spent quite a lot of thought putting together, the dashboards, the metrics that you get out of there, do they help inform the decision makers when considering acquisition? Is it that forward thinking, or is that?
That's the intent. We're still in the process of building some of this out. So we are getting more and more data. One of the cool things we're doing is not directly related to this, but we're doing maturity models. We're trying to get everybody into the tool chain. So we set up a maturity model. I got 1 minute left, so I guess this will be the last question. That we were asking the teams to fill out, and it helps us identify gaps in terms of their process and their tools. We've kind of plotted it out in a quadrant type of format. And gamify it a bit, try to get people in the upper right-hand quadrant. So what we're trying to do is use as an incentive structure to get people more into this process. And we would do the same thing with a startup. We would have them fill out an acquisition, have them fill out that template so we can see what the gaps are that we need to do to make the investment to get to the point where we can get that data. And as the data gets better, it's going to get trusted and it's going to be utilized. We do have a data lake of information that we do pull out of the tools, and that does feed into the corporate decision-making process. But it's going to get better, as we go along. So it's a good question. Okay, I think I'm out of time. So hopefully this was useful and interesting. I kind of geek out on it when I was talking to my sponsor over this. He was saying this is like, only people in your job are really going to get into this, but they'll be into it, right? So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thanks, everybody.